Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's Harry from Hasper TV. Back with another video. So now I'm trying something a bit different. This could be a pre-recorded video. So if you're watching this now, it's live, but I won't be commenting and replying to comments in the chat. So just so you guys know, this is just an experiment I'm trying. I'd like to see how you guys feel about it and just let me know in the comments. So today we're going to talk about Ange. As you can tell by the title, why the Ange-r or anger is justified. Don't excuse the pun. So we're going to look over what Ange has done so far. Does he actually have a future? Are people being too harsh? Basically, everyone's pointing at me. Um, is is he the man to take us the trophies? What kind of stuff he said to the press, which I think we do need to talk about, and also just in general, the style of play, and I'm just going to call it style because everyone wants to use different words nowadays, but let's just call it the style of play or tactics. My opinions on all of that. And yeah, we'll just start going. So, one comparison I've seen very much lately is the Arteta and Klopp first season comparison. As you guys might know, Ange actually has 60 points in 35 games, which is more than Arteta and Klopp had in their first seasons. And this has brought up a massive topic of debate actually in the past few days or weeks because Ange is the highest. Of course, like I mentioned, he has 60 points. Now, I think it's very important to get into context as to whether this is successful or not, if people want to use that word or progress, and just my thoughts on it. Well, first we need to look at Arteta's first season at Arsenal. Now, Arteta, for context, again, I use that word context. It was his first year in management completely. As we know, Arteta's a young manager. This is, I think, his third or fourth season in management completely, albeit he's only managed Arsenal. And for a first season, I know he lost like 9 out of 11 games. But I think he just to compare it as well, he's playing a back five because, as you guys know, Arsenal didn't have Saliba and Gabriel and Ben White and players like that back then. I think Kolasinac, players, defenders like that back in Arteta's first season, along with players like Aubameyang, Lacazette, and he sort of just adapted to what he had, which is what most managers tend to do in their first season at clubs. They tend to adapt to the players they have, especially with Arteta's first ever season ever as a coach or a manager, whatever you want to call it nowadays. I'm using various words because to prove a point as well, in the sense that everyone just wants to label things nowadays. Just accept things how they are. Okay, that's just how it is. Some people say style, some people say tactics. Everyone knows what you're talking about, whether you use a special word or not. But as for Arteta, was it a successful first season? Well, I think Arsenal won the FA Cup, which I'd argue is better than Ange's first season, actually, because we got knocked out the first round of the Carabao Cup. I'm not going to criticize Ange for the FA Cup, actually, because he did field mixed sides. And obviously, when he got to City at home, which, let's be honest, we're not expected to win that game, even though it was, if we did, I think it was our best chance to win the FA Cup in like 20, 30 years. So, well more than 30 years then. So, I think Arteta did actually quite well in his first season at Arsenal because, as I mentioned before, it's his first season in the Premier League as a manager and in the Premier League like ever. And compared to Ange, and I'll go on to this a bit later, has 28 years of experience behind him. Now, Klopp. Klopp has kind of gone down the. It's ironic because he's actually going to leave Liverpool at the end of the season, but I wanted to talk about it. But Klopp went down the kind of, not the Ange route. I don't want to label it the Ange route because he went for let's try play the style of play I want to play, regardless of the players I have. Now, Klopp did finish on less points totals than Ange, from what I can remember. Obviously, the season hasn't ended yet, but we're basing on the 35 games. And also, he did get into a few finals in the first season, though. And as I mentioned before, in terms of the cup runs, Ange hasn't done very well in that. And as we know, in the first round of the Carabao Cup, he rested like the whole team. And now, a lot of people may point to the fact that, well, he didn't know his players. But for me, considering I'll go into this a bit later as in Ange's motivations, and it's under another header. But Klopp, even if he had a bad season, we knew what he was going to do, right? We knew Klopp had won titles in Dortmund, especially with clubs quite similar to, I say, slightly smaller than Liverpool. Dortmund, in terms of their league, they're kind of in the same sort of spot as Liverpool, but Liverpool is obviously a much bigger club. Let's just be brutally honest about that. But sorry about this. But as for Klopp himself, even on the back of a bad season, we knew eventually he'll take Liverpool to titles, and obviously it did take a few years. So yeah, I mean, Klopp's first season was half decent. He got to a few finals, and it kind of matches around. I know he's not on this list, but Poch, because obviously Poch and Ange have actually faced quite a lot of comparisons, and I'd argue Poch was a better manager than Ange. Furthermore, Poch had Premier League experience, which maybe kind of played a part in that. Ange doesn't. And like I said, keep that in mind later because I will talk about that sort of thing. But as I said, has Ange done better than these 2 or 3 managers I mentioned? And I want to compare him to the first season of managers like, I mean, Redknapp came for half a season, which finished 7th. Arguably, I think Redknapp played better football and more attractive football because football playing now is not attractive to watch. I know it's attacking. I guess you could label it as that, but it's not attractive to watch. And right now, it's not very effective. And like I said, Poch. As for Martin Joel, I thought I'd just mention quickly because a lot of people feel like an Ange to Joel as well. Joel did kind of go down the Ange-ish route in terms of the attacking style, but as a caveat to that, and as a caveat to most of these managers I've actually mentioned, when we played the bigger sides, I don't know if you guys remember when we played Arsenal as well under Poch at the White Hart Lane, and actually missed that stadium. We won 2-1 under Harry Kane. We didn't play the high press in every game. There was especially for Arteta, there was a massive change of styles. As we know, Arsenal do play a very different style of football to Arteta first joined. Now, this comes down to opinion in the sense of, do you believe managers should use the players they have and adapt to players they have, which is the belief I always have, because that's playing to your strengths. I.e., we have of Dragusin, Romero, Van der Ven. Obviously, Dogi's injured right now, but Dogi and Porro, and you could argue playing a back 5 with those set of players is a better choice. Now, whether that fits Ange's style of play, which I kind of gather it won't, because I don't think you can avert Dogi and Porro to make like a 5 in midfield instead of using those players as like actual wing backs. I mean, maybe he could do it, but I actually think if he did that, it probably would benefit our back line a bit because you'd at least have 3 at the back every time an Isak or whatever it is used to happen, which has been our issues the past few times. Now, I'm going to move on from managers and go on to Ange himself. So I thought this was a good segue because we spoke about the manager comparisons, which, like, again, is a very big topic in terms of who has the better first season of just managers in general, especially because Ange obviously went on that 10-game unbeaten streak, winning 8 and drawing 2 in his first 10 games, which some may argue is probably going to take us into Europe, which was his aim at the start of the season. But on Ange's previous experiences himself, and this is where it counts against him to every other candidate that was on the market in the summer that Spurs went for, albeit Ange was the 4th and 5th choice manager, and he did know this. So let's not stray away from that. But his previous experiences, this is where it gets difficult for me to like kind of back him up is for the future, because this is his first season managing like in a top European league. Obviously, I mentioned Arteta before, and Arteta's kind of a special case, I guess, because like I said, it was his first year in management. It just happened to be at a top 6 club in Arsenal, and they kind of, you could argue, took a chance on him. And many people always say Spurs are almost taking the chance on Ange because, as I'm going to mention just now, Ange has no previous top 5 European League experience, which kind of counts against him in terms of the Klopp comparison that I mentioned before, and also Poch in terms of the Espanyol, and obviously Joel. I guess this is kind of why Ange is likened to Joel, because Joel didn't have any Premier League experience before he turned up, or really any top 5 European League experience. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong about that in the comments, because I don't. All I know is he was in Holland. He came with Santini as an assistant, and then he took over. But as for Ange's previous experiences, this is something that a lot of his kind of defenders, I'm I'm using quotation marks, have kind of said, well, you talk about this, you should take more value from it. Now, Ange has got 28 years of managerial experience. Now, in 20 years as a manager, you'd imagine he would have managed in much higher leagues, especially because, like I said, his defenders kind of make him highly sought of in terms of like, oh, he plays attractive football, blah, 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 blah. We shouldn't criticize his tactics, which, again, my next segue will kind of talk a little bit about that. And just, yeah, but as for his previous experiences, we're talking about Japanese league, Australia. He was manager. He was the manager of the Australian national team, which I guess kind of plays a bit more in his favor because of international experience. So I'll give him that. But as for his previous like league experience, if you want to name it that, it's not that high of a threshold, not that high of a standard. He came from Celtic, where, as we know, Stephen Gerrard came from Celtic. Brendan Rodgers came from Celtic, who did sort of bring Liverpool to a title charge in his second or third season. I think we're talking like 2010 times, and I can't, Mark, I'm sure someone in the comments will know what I'm talking about, under Luis Suarez, who he kept for an extra season. So, and then obviously Rodgers had a spell at Swansea. But Rodgers also had, before he went to Liverpool, he did have that spell at Swansea, like I said. So he did have more Premier League experience when he before went to Liverpool for that title charge, which people can say that either way, right? But it was a smaller club in Liverpool. But as for Ange, his experiences kind of count against him in some regards, especially Japan, Scotland, Australia. Okay, people might think I'm being disrespectful, but this is not how I'm trying to put it. It's the experience isn't that high of a standard. And this is where I argue in my previous point that Klopp having a bad season is not the end of the world, whilst this guy having a bad season or having a mess season, or say if we're going to have a 3-year project, which we'll see how that goes with Levy, and also bear in mind about the project thing because that'll be right at the end. But his previous experiences kind of count against Ange. That's my argument. And because if it was a Klopp, if it was a Poch, wasn't even. Now, I watched the Olympiacos game against Villa. It's both of those managers, Emery. I can't remember the Olympiacos name's manager, but he managed at Seville as well. They kind of count for them. I remember one day Ramos came to Spurs. I was quite excited because obviously he won the UEFA Cup at the time with Seville. So I could count on his previous experience, like with the Jose or Conte, where they've managed in Europe's top 5 leagues. And this is, again, I've probably this 3 or 4 times now. That counts against Ange. His non-previous EU, I was going to say EU European experience counts against him. And this is where it comes to the point where how long do you give him? Because is he going to learn from this 1-year experience? And that kind of gives him a good segue to the next bit, actually. Can an old dog learn new tricks? I was going to, it should really say slash tactics, but anyway. But as I mentioned before in this previous post, he has 20 years of experience. And as I've gathered and as I've spoken to other people, he doesn't really change his style of play. At Celtic, you guys remember they played Barcelona in the Champions League, which, okay, it's not a contradictory thing that they did not have European experience. So I mean in terms of like the whole league. But he didn't do very well in the Europe with Celtic. And the whole can old log learn new tricks. I'm going to talk about Arteta briefly because maybe this point will hit harder. Arteta's a younger manager, much younger manager than Ange. A bit like I said, Arsenal kind of took a chance on him because of his, what's the word? Apprentice to Arteta, Star Wars reference. And obviously Ange is in his 50s. Managers tend to, I'd say, I don't know. Obviously, Fergie retired at like 70, I think. So I guess he has 20 years ahead of him. But can Ange, because judging by his style of play in terms of tactics, can he learn to adapt to like a new league? Can he learn to adapt to like a new system in terms of like I mentioned before, playing at 5 at the back instead of 4-3-3 with inverted fullbacks every bloody game and every bloody week? But this talks about, in my opinion, can Ange evolve as a manager in terms of that kind of old dog learn new tricks? And the reason I use that phrase is, like I mentioned, he's in his 50s. So because of his age, it kind of counts against him. And in terms of tactics, we need to talk about set pieces. Of course, we have zonal marking in set pieces, in which we've conceded 17 goals, which actually is like a third of our goals we conceded, which is 58 goals, 57 goals, which is almost as much we conceded last season with the worst defense. And this kind of marries up with the tactics point. This is down to his tactics. I'm sorry. And I know we were told to concede chances, but I don't know. Maybe he needs to tweak something. An extra man at the back instead of just Van der Ven and Romero, I think, would help greatly, especially if we're in a transitional period. Stell made a great point on Hotspur Hood the other day, saying about, okay, managers can try to use repetition of practice to get these players to play this certain style or whatever. But he also mentioned the fact that I think the tactics here, leaving Emerson one-on-one with Madueke and Salah is not a great idea. Leaving Davies one-on-one with Saka is not a great idea. We all knew this. Like, let's not kid ourselves and say that we didn't know that was going to happen. Let's go back to his tactics or lack of changing in tactics, I guess, if you want to put it. So is he willing to change his tactics? I'm not even saying like every game, but he might need to do it, as Stell mentioned in this video, on the stream with another sort of coach person, David. Big shout out to him. He was actually very informative in terms of like just how he used to do his coaching. But it might kill the confidence of the players. And you could argue against Liverpool that kind of sort of happened, because obviously we went 4-0 down again and we did score 2 goals back. But some people argue in the last 15 to 20 minutes, Spurs threw away Ange's tactics and were doing long balls. If you guys remember, there was a few long balls to Richarlison, which didn't seem to me as everyone likes to say, the phrase that everyone likes to coin, Ange ball. So can Ange ball adapt? Can Ange ball, I hate that phrase, but I'm just going to use it for the sake of this. Can Ange ball adapt? Can Ange ball rotate? Can Ange ball change form? I don't know, because right now I've seen the same tactics. So it depends whether you put value on repetition or value on like just winning the games. Now, I'm always of the belief, and I always be like this: you win the games first, and then you play this attacking style later. And this is mainly because I'm more of the confidence thing, where if the players are winning games, I think you're better off taking risks when they're winning games on like a regular basis. And I'm going to use a Chelsea case and point example. Under Jose, in his first spell at Chelsea weren't used to winning titles. Now, he went to Chelsea. Some people may argue play negative football. I'm not going to sit and argue about that, because that's each their own in terms of what's negative and what's positive. I actually quite like counter-attacking football, actually. If you guys don't really want to know, I find it just more effective and more direct. But yeah, Jose kind of changed that club when he went in 05, 06. He changed the mentality of that club. Now they started winning. And as you guys obviously know, he was sacked 2 or 3 years down the line. And other managers came in and played more expansive football, which is what the Chelsea faithful actually asked for. Well, did they ask for that? I'm just going by social media in that aspect, which kind of could segue to my next point after this. So, in terms of kind of old log learning new tricks, I mean, only Ange can answer this. Would he evolve as a manager? Because there were issues with set pieces before at Celtic, and apparently they were fixed. But if there were issues before and he knew that was going to happen, why did he not fix the problem at Spurs before he even started? That's how I would argue. And in terms of tactics, I'm not 50-50 about it. I'm just saying, in my opinion, he should change tactics based on the opposition. I'm not saying change literally everything. Like, we're playing Burnley on the weekend. I wouldn't want him to go 5 at the back against Burnley at home, even though I think Burnley have a good shout to beat us because of what goals we're letting in. But I would say not to go defensive, for example, that game. But away to Liverpool, which we haven't won in like 13, 14 years, away to Chelsea, where, again, rubbish at the bridge. And to kind of like just stem the flow of the goals would be helpful and keep clean sheet. I think changing tactics, even in the short term, won't be a bad idea. But in the long term, in terms of kind of old learn new tricks, like I said, it's down to Ange. Can he evolve as a manager? I don't know. Like I said, I don't know him. So yeah. My next segment is on the low threshold. So we're 20 minutes into the video now. Probably go on for another 10 to 15 minutes. If you're still watching. Um, I don't think I'll be in the chat because things will air in the morning. I won't be here. But anyways, a low threshold. So as I mentioned before about tactics and stuff like that, a lot of Spurs fans, this does not include me, by the way. I'm in the minority in this. At the end of last season, they hated Conte because of his, again, quote unquote negative football, which I will label for the sake of this video as defensive because I just needed a label for this. Under Mourinho, we played defensive football. As the effectiveness, I thought was effective. I thought Conte's football was effective. It just needed like a few players, a lot much higher quality players than we had at the time to actually be successful. And obviously, people may argue that in terms of Ange, but in terms of low threshold, and I think I've been arguing about this for like ages on other streams, but I think Spurs fans had a very low threshold for Ange and for whoever walked into the door in the summer. And the reason I say this is because people were just beckoning and begging for attacking football. That's all I ever saw on streams at the end of the last year. Obviously, I have family that go to Spurs, and one of my brothers is more in that sort of category in the sense that they want attacking football. You find a lot of the older fans, and I don't want to be ageist here. They tend to care more for the style, as in Spurs attacking style, the Spurs way, attacking football, which kind of meant it was a very low threshold for Ange coming in terms of expectations. And this kind of, I guess, marries up to what I spoke about before about the tactics. People aren't that bothered that we're playing so open. I am, because we're leaking like 3 or 4 goals a game. And I won't be surprised again if we concede another 3 against Burnley. I know we're at home, but it's just the way we're playing. But to me, it's a very low threshold to measure a manager's success. Even in the first season, just because we're playing attacking football, it's been successful. I think that's a bit disingenuous. And I'm going to cite this back to Poch, which I mentioned earlier. Now, under Poch, we did play an attractive, quote unquote, style. I'd say Poch's football is kind of Redknapp's football, except more refined in the sense of, and also more. We just had a more of a solid base under Poch. Maybe it's because of the players, but it was more controlled. I thought Redknapp's football was more free. The players seemed to have a bit more freedom. And it was attacking football, but Redknapp was actually brought in to keep us up initially. And then the next season he took us in the Champions League. Obviously, he was the first manager to do that. Poch was more in terms of, he had more of a solid base. And the reason I say this is because of Dembele and Wanyama. We don't have those sort of midfielders at Spurs at the moment. I don't count Basuma and so on in that respect. But as for the low threshold, like I said, he only had to play attacking football. He only had to get players to keep the ball forward. It's not that high of a threshold to measure Ange on in this first season. So if you're just a general fan, I think you'd consider this season a success. For me, it's not really been a success. We didn't win a trophy. We didn't really have a cup run, so I can't say we really gave it like a massive go to do it. Getting it back into Europe, to me, is not really like a big deal because, again, we won't make Champions League. Let's not even talk about that. So it was a very low threshold. And I'm going to go back to Ange's press conference, which is actually my next topic. In his first press conference, he said the aim for the club was to get back into Europe. And he was the man to do it. And yes, he probably will get us back into Europe, barring an absolute collapse, which some may argue we're actually on the way of doing. But it was a very low threshold as to what is a success for Ange in this first season. And like I said, I think not my anger, I use that just for the thing. My criticisms and other people's criticisms are kind of justified because conceding too many goals. Like I can compare it back to Poch. Poch was conceding a lot of goals in his first season, but he didn't have a Van der Ven. He didn't have I mean, Walker and Rose were kind of coming through at the time, especially Rose. But he didn't have a Van de Ven. I'd argue that Ange's defense won't change at all. Um, and the reason I mentioned Poch is because Alderweireld arrived the season after, and that's when our defense was fixed. Obviously, Wanyama came a couple of seasons after that, which fixed him with Dembele. Attacking wise, though, we're more frantic, but we're kind of like that in the first season under Poch as well. But the turning point, or the point which kind of solidified my belief in Poch, was the 5-3 win at home to Chelsea. In terms of the fact that, look, Spurs can do something under Poch. But I haven't really had that moment of the season under Ange. And the problem is, it's like we're regressing. Some may argue that these 4 fixtures in a row is just the fixture generator, especially because they did move the Chelsea game. But we would have had 3 in a row anyway. But as a person, I always believe that going to these games, you need to be fighting for a point. And I know it might come across as quite negative playing defensive in these 4 games, but I'm always of belief that if you're playing teams of higher quality than you need to change the system, which is what Arteta did when he went to Etihad earlier this season. But you need to change it because otherwise you're going to get mashed up, which is what happened to us, especially with the style we're playing and the tactics or whatever you want to call it. Because I use word style because I say defensive style and attacking style. That's why I'm just using this word. But yeah, some people on YouTube don't like that. But I just think Ange is a very low threshold. So next season, it'll be interesting to see what people say is his expectations, which kind of goes on to my next point about his press conferences. Now, this is going to get quite interesting. So Ange talks a lot in his press conferences, which I'd argue is to his detriment. And the reason I say this is that at the beginning of the season, he was kind of labeled as a media darling because he would talk. The media would love it. He comes across as someone who is just like you and I, which is, I think, why a lot of fans kind of bought him. I don't know if that's the right word, but they've bought into him and his philosophy and his style and everything because he comes across as just a normal geezer, which is fair enough. I mean, that's fine. I guess for me, individually speaking, I like Poch's press conference. I thought his were all right. Jose's, I mean, he's box office, so I always used to watch his ones. Conte was quite similar, but for me, Redknapp will be my favourite. But again, that's an individual choice because I found Redknapp very, because he was a very experienced manager, but he was very refreshingly honest. I know Conte was honest, but in a different way. And Jose we all know what Jose is like in the press conferences. He loves talking. But for me, Ange has come across as just a normal geezer in the press conferences, which is why a lot of people, like I said, have bought into it and into him, which, like I said, is very normal. But we need to talk about some of the stuff he's been saying because it's very contradictory. He's gone back on himself quite a lot. And whether that's to do with the fact that he's reading off a PR sheet initially and then he's saying his truth later on, or whether, which way around you want to take it. But I'm going to talk about his press conferences. So let's talk about a few of them. He used the words mate a lot. So maybe that's why everyone seems to like him. But I'm one of the few who's not really been conned by it. So maybe I can give a more honest assessment of it and his comments. So initially he said a month or 2 ago, saying that even if you don't have the players you need for your system, just play it anyway. Along the lines of that. I'm sure you guys know what we're talking about. But then recently he came out and said, yes, I need new players, blah, 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 blah. So do you take that as he said he needs the players to play his way now, but before he said play the way anyway, which kind of goes back to my tactics point in the sense that if now you realize you don't have the players to play your tactics, why don't you change it? So yeah, anyway, that's a debate. If you guys want to debate about that, feel free. As for the other comments, I'm going to go back to the title comment because obviously he said it'd be a process. And I'm not saying I don't believe him, but in his recent comments, I think he's shooting himself in the foot. So, I'd be all on board if he was saying stuff like, oh, it's a process. It may take 2 to 3 years for us to reach a Premier League title challenge or to catch City or Arsenal or because Arsenal, let's be honest, they're like the top two team now, right? And Liverpool might have a little drop off, but they're sort of still in there for me. But yeah, so, like I said, it's a conversation for another day. But to start talking about us being title challenge, which he did explicitly say, I'd be disappointed next season we're not in title challenge. And the thing is, initially, some people have seen that saying that's just like a throwaway comment. But in a recent interview with Mark Schwarzer, he did mention about Spurs fans might feel disappointed next season if we're in the title and race and we don't do it, right? So it's obviously something he believes, which again, this is another topic of conversation. For him saying that, is he saying to the club, oh, I want to be in title challenge next season and I need like a certain list of players, which will be our next point in a second. So for me, he keeps saying title, title, title. Or do you think, like me, he's been a bit delusional in the sense that we're so far away from the top three, you'd need, I think, 6, 7 players of, very, very, very top quality to reach the gap between us and Arsenal. I'd argue 6 or 7, which I think 4 is reasonable this summer. He's always talked about like 4 or 5 transfer windows, which then maybe we're talking like the season after that, not next season coming up. As in, obviously, the season will finish, next season will happen, and the season after that will be the entire challenge. But he's alluded to it quite a lot. Whether people can believe it or not, I guess, kind of falls on the fact of your judgment. Is he saying it just to get fans excited? Which a lot of fans are talking about title challenge next season. And if you speak to some people around the club, which I don't, but I know from others that this is the truth, they do believe that they want to be in a title talk next season, which is why the youngsters are not getting through. And Ange-r was actually known for using his youth at Celtic, so that's quite interesting. Do I believe we'll win title challenge next season? No, especially because I don't think Liverpool will give Ange every player he wants. But another thing about players and transfers, which again, it was a great segment by myself. Comes back. But yeah, so he did mention at the start of the season all his signings were his. So ironically, he did mention in his last press conference that he mentioned Johnson like a glowing way to Schwarzer, which kind of alludes to the fact that maybe he did want Johnson and maybe he did like him from before. And I know the club were watching for 2 years. But did Ange really know Valise? Did Ange really know Bergval? Personally, I had to guess he didn't. So for us to come to the conclusion that all the signs are his, we can only go by his words. And this is another topic for debate because obviously Werner came in, who in the short term is a stopgap, and that's fine. And Dragusin came in, who's barely got a kick. So does he see him as only like a Romero backup? I don't know, but I'd hazard a guess the amount of goals we're leaking, maybe Dragusin would be a good idea to slot him in at left back or move Van de Ven there, and which is what I've been arguing for weeks. But if that's a bit of the question, how's he going to use Dragusin? And that's with Werner coming permanently. There's a lot of Spurs fan base, kind of including myself, even though I'm probably already there, who said there'll be Ange out if he signs Werner. And this is based on the fact that he said every signing is mine. I take up every signing, blah, 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 blah. And there's obviously massive talk that Werner is going to sign on a permanent deal. It's only 15 million. Now, that 50 million can be used on another transfer to get a better player, which is what people like myself will argue. But if he signs Werner and he expects us to be in a title challenge, then I don't even know what he's thinking. Unless Werner's going to suddenly change his shooting boots and score like 30 goals a season like he did at Leipzig. But as Ange alluded to himself, if Werner himself wasn't in that situation, we wouldn't have got him. So you take it as you will. It is like a cheaper gamble, but I'd say Werner, with his age being against him, 28, 29, I would argue that it's not 15 million is not actually worth it. If it was Trossard, I'd say yes, but Trossard's gone. Because Trossard, as we know, is actually doing bits at Arsenal, and at Brighton he was doing bits. Whilst Werner, chance of him improving before how he was when he was 23, 24 before he went to Chelsea is quite minimal, very low chances. So yeah, his press conference is kind of contradictory. Would I prefer more honest manager? 100%. I'd rather a Conte who came out and said that Spence wasn't his, because at least we know which signings are his and which signings aren't. I'm not saying club signings can't exist, but Spurs they always seem to. So what choice do I have? But as for his press conferences, this is my gripe with him. I just find it very controversial. But yeah, just conclude. I went on for 40 minutes almost. But is the anger justified? I say yes. I mean, fans have every right not to be happy with Ange because, like I said, like the points I mentioned throughout this video, there are things that are against him. I mean, his tactics, they worked for the first 10 games. They're not working now. Hopefully, they wouldn't work against Burnley tomorrow, but guess we'll see. And I think that he had a very low threshold this season to be successful. Like I said, people just wanted attacking football. His previous experiences kind of count against him. I'm sorry. If he had 8 years of experience, like say 10 in Spain or 5 in Spain or 3 years in Spain even, and then maybe I'd have a bit more confidence. But he also alluded to that in his interview with Schwarzer that himself. He didn't expect to be in a Premier League job, which at least he's honest about it, but which kind of marries up to what I'm been saying. Should we believe in Ange? I hope he changes his ways and I hope he evolves as a manager. But the time in terms of his age is kind of against him in that respect. Unless you're telling me in 5 years he's going to be a different sort of manager, I guess. As you see with Pep, but he's a bit younger. He's kind of evolved as a manager. Like I mentioned, Arteta, who was always going to evolve, I think, because of his age. More like, he can be more easy to absorb things. And I think Arteta, in that sense, it does play a part. With Klopp, he's just a very good manager. And he has kind of evolved. His Liverpool team has kind of changed over the years in terms of style. Some games he goes away from home and he plays counter-attacking, like against City, which I consider that a good choice. But in home games, of course, he plays more attacking, like against us when they beat us 4-0. But yeah, Ange needs to evolve as a manager. He needs to try out different things. And I actually thought this season he would. Some youngsters might get a go. Because his previous experiences kind of hold against him. In his press conferences, I feel like he's just contradicting himself constantly, which to me just doesn't really help anyone. And again, he makes some comments about players believing in the system. Of course, that's down to him to convince them to believe in the system, in my opinion. But there raises question marks whether he's lost in dressing room or not. But I think that's what I mean. I think that anger is justified with him. Like I said, if we don't beat Burnley, I don't know if he's going to last. But it'll be interesting if the club stick behind him, because if they do, maybe we end up with an Arteta result later down the line. But it remains to be seen. And like I said, there's a lot of things that are against him in terms of his previous experience, the tactics not changing. I'm sorry, at all. There are a threshold in the first season, which I think is. I'm not saying it's against them, but the fact that fans just want attacking football kind of means whatever we did this season, as long as we kick the ball forward, they were fine with it, and they seem like they're fine with it. His pre conferences, I feel like he's selling us a dream. And like I said, I'm not really falling for it. But a Premier League title next season is way far off. Unless, like I said, we sign 60, 70 million pound players. Like an Isak or whatever. And again, the adaptation of tactics, all the top managers do it, all the elite managers do it. Obviously, and I guess we'll see. But come on, you Spurs, and let me know if you like this time of format of like a pre-recorded thing. And this has